A pleasure to be here. Justin, I know you well. Lucien, pleasure to meet you. Glad to have you both here. What we're going to do at the top here is walk through sort of an abstract around how we look at second halves, how we look at comparing first to second half, what the context and stats we're trying to understand. And then we're going to dive into specific players. So there's a list that Lucien and Justin have both contributed to. I'm here to guide the conversation. I like to be someone who prepares for the season as the season's coming. These guys are digging deep already, so I'm learning here as well as we go through. I have my own opinions. I'll share them probably not that often. But what we'll do here is in the abstract, Lucien, if we talk about the idea of second half, right? I'm going to define it quickly. After the All-Star break is the second half of the Major League Baseball season. We're looking at guys who far exceeded their output in the first half, right? We're trying to see, was there some anomaly in the first half? Were the benefits of a second half there? What are some of the criteria? What are some of the ideas you're looking for of how you justify a second half that is worth caring about into the next fantasy baseball season?
Yeah, so I guess, first of all, just like as you said, the second half, we're defining it as after the All-Star break. It's a pretty arbitrary cutoff, obviously. Yep. So kind of thinking about that, we have to kind of realize that that's just like a even smaller sample of the season than we look at if you look at the full season. And just naturally, there's going to be a lot of fluctuation just with terms and things that are a bit more luck dependent. So, and that's kind of one of the first things I look at for sure is like, is a player, if they're either exceeding their expectations or exceeding what they did in the first half, or what they've done their career before, is there something that seems a little fluky that's going to be driving that? Is their BABIP really high or really low all of a sudden? For pitchers in particular, looking at home run per fly ball rate, are they just a lot of fly balls going out of the yard for some reason in the second half, or they did in the first half, or vice versa? So kind of trying to usually kind of look for those red flags that maybe something like is a little bit fluky, a little bit lucky, just as kind of part of the variation that comes with the small sample. And then but digging a little deeper, if I see something like a hitter, is all of a sudden, being more selective at the plate, perhaps maybe a pitcher's altering its pitch mix in some way, something like that's going to get me more excited that maybe this is a real change, either positively or negatively. So it's really just, I think, kind of looking in these small samples, all about kind of trying to dig out like the things that are maybe more luck as much as we can, and then trying to kind of see a bit more what looks like it's more of a change in process.
Right. And Justin, where I want to go further with this with you is Lucien already hit on the small sample, right? We're talking about a data-driven sport, a data-driven fantasy baseball process. We can't watch every player. We can't research every single player. So we really rely on places like Fangraphs and other pitchers list and all these different sites that produce statistics for us. And now we're talking about drilling it down to even smaller sample sizes and even smaller ways to determine it. And then you loop in injuries as well. And what we know about, what we don't know about. That's a lot of information to take in to try to determine this sort of segment that, this hour we're going to discuss, and also how to approach these players when you're looking at ADP and looking at various things. How much time do you spend on this subject, on trying to identify second half players that you want to invest in, second half players that you want to ignore because you think it's an anomaly, or guys who had a poor second half that are going below where you think their value actually lies?
I probably shouldn't say this as I'm on this panel. I don't put as much stock into it as I think other people do, because if we're talking about a half season, usually we're talking around a 300 plate appearance sample, right? If you looked at a 300 plate appearance sample over the full season, you'd probably ignore it for the most part, right? You probably go, well, that was small sample, or we don't have a big enough sample to make a determination. Now, does that mean that a second half breakout or a second half bust doesn't mean anything? Absolutely not. I think we're going to talk about some guys who today that we go, hey, this second half means something, but it's not because the second half, like the stats in the second half, actually are telling the story. It's some sort of tangible change that led to that happening, right? And so for me, often what I do is I see what other people are doing, right? Like other people are going, oh, this guy's was second half stud, he's going to be great next. And I go, okay, well, I'm going to go investigate that guy, right? So while I don't put a ton of stock into it necessarily, I'm glad other people do, because it gives me things to go and research a little bit more in depth, because sometimes I might miss it. Sometimes we all miss, certain things. And so for me, it is a starting point to go, okay, do I buy the story that's being told, or do I see holes in that story?
Yep. And I think that's a great approach to fantasy baseball writ large, right? Is the idea that None of us, maybe some of you out there, and bless your soul if you do, but have the time to research, 28 men per roster plus minor leagues plus guys who are still free agents at this point. And so being able to use a device like Twitter, yes, I still call it Twitter, to, follow fantasy analysts, see who they're talking about, read the articles, read the different places, I think is great. Lucien, from your perspective, and we'll get into specific players momentarily, and if they're second half stars or second half duds, you all watching want to throw into chat here. Happy to get to those later on. We do have a list of players that we want to get through. But Lucien, when we talk about now evaluating against this coming season, right? That's what this is all about. You're doing this research, and then are you putting a star next to a player's name? Are you saying, yes, I believe in this player, I'm moving him up, valuation wise, a couple of rounds? Or is it simply just a strategy to understand this is a guy that I believe in, this is a guy that I think the second half was a fluke or a fake or whatever it might have been?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably more the latter, I would say. I don't think it makes, kind of like Justin was saying, like, it is a small sample. I don't think it's, generally speaking, worth it to make like just evaluation purely based in the second half, whether it's good or bad. But certainly, yeah, like, I mean, if some guy like really comes on strong in the second half and there's that change that I see that might be interesting, that's someone I'm definitely more and on. I'll get to some specific names in I guess a little bit. But I think I would say that I feel that way more for pitchers. I would say I generally buy it more just because the pitcher is starting the plate appearance, they're the one who's in control. I think some of that stuff, like in terms of the approach of how they're pitching, like the changes they decide and how they're pitching to hitters, because they're kind of a bit more authoritative in what they can control, I generally will buy that a bit more. So some of those pitchers who really were great in the second half, kind of going through this exercise, looking at guys, generally speaking, those guys are people who, if they really shoved in the second half, I might kind of slide them up a bit more. Got it.
Yeah, and pitching's such a crapshoot. It feels like every year it gets worse, but I think that is a great approach and a way to really. It's all about refining your own process, right? It's all about really finding the information, deciding how much you want to invest in a specific player. Guys who are playing on NFBC or playing multiple underdog lineups or whatever it might be. You start talking about portfolios and how much of a certain player you might have across different lineups. But it really is about your own process and how you're drafting. And I do think things like this play out more in auction drafts than snake drafts because of just the way ADP and those things tend to trend in that direction. But I want to get into the actual players here. Shout out to Jason Collette there in chat saying he gets all of 99% of his information from Justin. The other 1%, we can't be sure about. But
I and that's a poor mistake. Like, that is just like, you would think Jason after having so many years in the industry, he'd know better. And having been friends with him for so long at this point, he'd know better. But I mean, he just doesn't learn apparently.
Amazing. So good on so many different levels. But let's dive in. Let's talk about these specific players. We're going to walk through either Justin or Lucien, whoever wants to jump in first. Don't feel like you have to wait for me to call you into the conversation. But we're going to start with hitters first because chicks dig the long ball. And Justin, a great Shakespeare insult is lily-livered. So you can call it nice. That still plays. So if you want to call someone a lily-livered scoundrel or a lily-livered boy, that's really down-putting. So put that in the back of your brain for future use. But we're going to start with offense here and make our way through. And I was reading up on Max Kepler, and I found an article from August 8th of last year saying there's no way the Twins can offer him one more year, right? And it went through his first half stats, right? It went through the idea, and then you see they offered arbitration and he got brought back and he gets his money, and that's the real world implications of a hot second half, right? That's where a team says, oh, okay, maybe there's some left in the tank for someone like Max Kepler. Maybe we need him in our lineup. But Lucien, let's kick off with you, and then guys, feel free to talk back and forth. I'll jump in when necessary. Are you buying Max Kepler's second half? This is a guy who's shown us pop in the past throughout his major league career high 36 home runs back in 134 games in 2019. So we want to believe it's there, right? We want to say he can get back to that. What's your perspective on someone like Max Kepler?
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of in the middle on someone like Max Kepler. I think he's not who he was in the first half. His first half was really, really rough. Hit 207, /207, 279, 409. Just a rough first half and a really, really strong second half, as you said. Came on late in the season. the 36 home runs in reference, that's 2019. That was the year where everyone was hitting a lot of home runs. The ball was crazy. So I don't think that that's like something that's a reasonable expectation of Max Kepler. But I think that looking at his career and where his career is, his consistent like stats throughout his career, he is someone who's shown at times like some pop before. So the second half wasn't like totally unprecedented, where he was hitting the ball a lot harder. Was really struggling in 2022 and also last year, the first half, he was hitting a lot of ground balls. So the first half of last year, he was hitting the ball on the ground around like 45% of the time. And he really shifted that in the second half, made an effort to hit the ball in the air a lot more, hit the ball a lot harder. So that's promising. Just in terms of getting more opportunities, getting home runs, extra base hits. So that was a big thing that really turned around for him. And I believe that like that change does seem like it could be a little sticky. Also, his first half BABIP was 2.813, which is just so low. It's actually interesting looking at Kepler's career. He has a 253 career BABIP, which just is insanely low for anyone. Couldn't really find anything that could justify that low of a BABIP for his career. So that was kind of a little weird to me. So I think probably lies somewhere between his first half and his second half. I'd be more inclined, honestly, I think, to believe the second half and the first half, just because that BABIP was so low, and there did seem to be a real change in trying to elevate the ball a lot more. But I also don't necessarily think that what he was doing in the second half is sustainable. I don't think he's going to hit 36 home runs again.
Right, and he's being valued fairly where you would see Max Kepler valued. I don't think many people are jumping to draft him much earlier. But Justin, Lucien mentions BABIP, and this is one of those stats, lies, damn lies, and statistics moments. BABIP is a great thing to cite, and I think it's a great contextual thing. But in the second half, he had a BABIP of 351, and Lucien, you hit on that as a career. That BABIP usually sits between 250 to 270, depending on the year we have. Yeah. Is that a stat you take into consideration here, Justin? Is this one of those check marks that you're trying to see what's right, see what's possible, and see what's next?
See, yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. You've got to like look at this story and say, does it make sense? And when you do that, there are two things that stick out to me. One, Lucien mentioned the BABIP, right? Like the BABIP is gigantic in the second half. So to me, that tells me the batting average is not going to be anywhere close to 309. Like that he is, probably a 250 hitter, which he's kind of been the majority of his career. The other stat that kind of jumped out to me is one that's a good one for this case, right? And it's that the main change he made at the plate was to get more aggressive in the zone, right? He started swinging more at the zone. He stopped being so patient inside of it. Not that he's a super patient guy to begin with, but he made an effort to become more aggressive, and that gave him more opportunities because in spite of being more aggressive in the zone, his zone contact stayed the same. And one of the things I talk about a lot is I like guys with high zone contacts because it gives them the opportunity to get lucky. So maybe that BABIP, it's obviously too high, but maybe it doesn't come back down to career norms and stays a little bit higher if he can continue the kind of selective aggression inside of the zone. I mean, I will give the caveat. I've always been a Max Kepler dude. I've always wanted him to have a breakout. When he did, and then it went away, it was heartbreaking for me because I was like, this is a guy who could be like a real star. He started playing baseball later in life than most people do when they, as a major leaguer. Like a lot was kind of going for him for kind of a later breakout than normal. I don't know that this is the breakout. But do I think you can get back value at his current ADP? I do. He's going to play every day. He's a great defender. And I think there is upside for more, just maybe not what we saw in the second half.
I'll probably say this more times than I prefer during this hour, but a great point there by Justin, is that opportunity matters, right? Like that's really where this all comes down to. And you made two cases there on opportunity. One, swinging at more balls in the zone means he provides more opportunity for good contact on balls within the strike zone, but also he's going to play. And this is a guy who had times where it seemed he might be on the way out in Minnesota, might not get regular at-bats. Defense helps there. Second half probably helps as well. So I think I saw 279 or so, 273 over on NFBC is what I see as his current ADP. Quickly, Lucien, Justin, any problem with high 270s or 270s for Max Kepler?
Not at all.
No, I think that's reasonable.
Great. I think that's what this conversation is really going to come down to is if at value currently, do you buy or sell against what we saw from the second half and what might be some upside? So continuing this conversation, we are making our way through, of course, the variety of players who were second half stars is what we're using. These are guys who outperformed their first half for sure, maybe even outperformed their career norms in the second half of 2023. We look next at somebody who has dealt with a variety of reasons he hasn't been on the field in Marcell Ozuna. And we've seen injuries. We've seen other things for Ozuna over the time. We've seen talent, right? This is a guy that clearly has some upside and has the ability to affect the game from a baseball perspective and obviously have high upside from your fantasy baseball perspective. Looking quickly at his splits to scroll through, second half saw a let's see, versus righties. Second half, an ISO of 346, an OPS of 1019, batting average of 301, WRC plus of 168. These are all sort of the, quote unquote advanced statistics. Second half from a counting stats perspective, 23 home runs, 48 runs scored, 60 RBIs. Justin, I believe in the past you've been an Ozuna fan. I believe this is a guy I'm sure you've rostered at points across your fantasy baseball career. Do I caveat this with if healthy? Like, is this the
I think
moment?
you have to.
Okay. And is that what we saw in the second half? Was he healthy? Was he fully healthy in the second half to provide these stats?
I mean, it seemed like it was. Marcell Ozuna has pretty much been a good baseball player or a good hitter. He's not a good baseball player. He's a really bad defender. But he has been a good fantasy baseball player when healthy. And I think what we saw was kind of a return to health last year, largely aided by the fact that he only played the field 2 games.
Right.
Now, that has its own special set of caveats themselves, right? Like, he gets hurt. This is a guy who's dealt with injury off and on throughout his career. Teams like to use that DH spot to rotate players in and out. Atlanta has a loaded lineup. There are paths to him losing playing time, either because he performs poorly and they just decide we're going to use DH for someone else. He gets injured. That being said, like, Marcell Ozuna is a fairly decent price. I think people get scared off by the UT only kind of designation that he's going to enter pretty much all leagues with this year. So I think at the price, it's a fine buy because, yeah, I do believe in what we saw in terms of the second half skills. But there is risk. And if you don't like taking on risk, then you might want to stay away from Marcell Ozuna.
There's a Twitter handle that comes to mind about injuries and injury.
He's a doctor.
We'll fill you in later if you need to be. Lucien, from your perspective, the career statistics back up that Marcell Ozuna, maybe I don't say a top 100 player, but he could clearly exceed top 100 value on a season if he is playing 140 games, getting regular at bats. Are you buying that the second half is more legitimately who Marcell Ozuna is, or do you see some warts in there that are worth pointing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marcell Ozuna is a really good hitter. I think I kind of agree with what Justin said. I think that if he can stay on the field, he's probably going to be productive. I do love the fact from a fantasy perspective that he's on the Braves, just because even though there is some competition for playing time, he's going to get a lot of RBIs and a lot of runs sitting in that lineup, which is pretty loaded. He hits the ball really hard. He has throughout his whole career. I do think that in addition to kind of the injury concerns, he is getting a little older, and sometimes just older players decline faster than we expect. It's hard to always know exactly when they're going to break. So he's I think like 33 or 34 right now. So
ancient. He's ancient.
Yeah, ancient. So that kind of would concern me a little bit, and definitely the injury stuff. But I mean, I think that when he's healthy, he should be really productive. And he really did struggle a lot the past 2 years before 2023 really turned it around. So I think some people might kind of discount how good the hitter he was just because he was out in those years for various reasons and he wasn't very good when he played. But I do think that when he's on the field, he's one of the better hitters in the sport still.
Yeah, and I think, again, context matters. The Braves offense, as you said, yields so many more opportunities for those counting stats, talking about 5x5 leagues, points leagues. He's clearly going to put up the numbers if he's healthy. So I dig buying on Marcell Ozuna, and I think he can far exceed his ADP, which I think was around 150, 151 last time I looked earlier today. Don't know how many drafts are happening right now to really affect ADP. But up next, this is a fun one to me, Lucien. And Nolan Jones is a name that you'd see a couple of years back, I guess 2 years ago, of somebody who could come up soon and influence leagues. And then you saw a slow start and a big second half. And now you have to dive into minor league stats, and you have to worry about context around minor league stats, which is a whole other level of digging into statistics. The grades are there, right? From a hit power perspective, his speed. There are all these really juicy things that we want to believe. Are you a believer in Nolan Jones?
Yeah, I actually am a big believer in Nolan Jones. I think that he's a really good player, and yeah, as you said, like he's someone who I think I would have just loved to see him, like what he could do in the majors, more of what he can do in the majors the past couple of years. I'm really glad he got a chance in Colorado. Obviously, and like particularly from a fantasy perspective, like yeah, his stats are going to look really great because he's playing in Colorado. That's obviously a huge plus. But I think he's just a good hitter regardless of ballpark. And I also think that like the changes he made during the season were really encouraging. Just like looking at his September, he struck out way less in September than he had in other months. And he started walking a lot more. And I think part of that, there was a really great article actually on Fangraphs a few days ago by Chris Gilligan, kind of writing about how Jones really kind of got a better grasp of the zone and really excelled in what like StatCast would call the shadow zones, like kind of right on the outskirts of the zone. So kind of like being ready to like just by hitting those pitches really well. So he had tremendous value in the kind of those pitches that are kind of on the outskirts of the zone. So just kind of having a really great understanding of his strike zone and what he wants to hit, and just really taking command of at bats. So that's just really, really impressive. He just chased a lot less as the season went on too. Even his pitchers kind of got more wary of him. So I just think the way he adjusted throughout the season was really impressive. And the stats in Colorado are just going to be, in terms of batting average, all of that, it's going to be really high. So I think Nolan Jones is someone who I'm really impressed by. I buy a second half, even if he doesn't necessarily hit quite as well in the second half. I buy that he's a really top tier hitter.
Yeah, Justin, I love the fit in Colorado. Somebody with his speed, right, hitting those gaps, the doubles are there for you on a regular basis. I'm terrible at assessing rookies and young players in Major League Baseball. I admit it regularly. I tend to stay away from them when it comes to drafting and fab, just because I recognize it's a hole in my game. What do you think of, I think he's a near top 50 draft pick right now, if I remember. I think it saw him between 50 and 60 over on NFBC. That scares the crap out of me. Like that's a high investment. I know the talent is there. How do you project him this year? If you've done projections yet, how do you look at what you expect from him? And do you buy the second half as being legitimate gains towards a breakout here in 2024?
I was afraid that Lucien and I were going to agree on everything and it wouldn't be as exciting. But this is the one I get to just be like, no, I don't buy this. Now, do I think that he can be a productive fantasy player in Nolan Jones? Absolutely. I mean, he plays in Colorado. He's going to play every day. Unless the Rockies do a weird thing where they decide not to play their young players.
Because not that they've ever done that before.
Yeah, exactly, right? They don't have for that. I don't think that his playing time is necessarily at risk unless he like truly like falls apart. And that part does help. It's a huge outfield. You get the thin air. You're going to have higher BABIPs than you would expect from just a traditional player. A 401 BABIP, though, is what he had on the season. That is just extreme. He got extremely lucky. Even in the second half, when the BABIP came down, the BABIP was went up in the second half to 391. He's probably more of like, even with the BABIP help, like a 350 BABIP guy. So like the BABIP's coming down 40 points. The batting average is going to come down with it. My biggest issue, though, with Nolan Jones isn't the BABIP inflation. My biggest issue is he's not a very good hitter inside of the zone. We're talking about a guy who, in the second half, when he was hot, had a 72.8% zone contact. For context, that would be the worst in Major League Baseball if he had been a qualified hitter last year. Like, that is really, really bad contact skills in the zone. And so while he doesn't necessarily have like a super high shooting strike rate, this strikeout rate is real. Like, he is going to be a 30% strikeout rate because he's not good at hitting the ball in the zone. He kind of swings really wildly, really aggressively. When it makes contact, it sounds good. He's got power in that bat. But like, I think when you're drafting a guy in the top 50, you're looking for him to take it another step forward. You're not drafting him because you want him to finish as the 50th overall player. You're drafting him because you think he can finish as the 15th overall player. And I don't think it buys in the risk enough. I think the ADP is way, way too high for the amount of risk that you get from Nolan Jones. He will not be on a single one of my teams this year, I can promise you.
Ooh. How many drafts you doing this year, Justin?
Probably 15-ish.
All right. Was that like on a chalkboard somewhere in the house that can be erased quickly and add a 2 in front of it? Just in case?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's nice that I had a decent season last year. I get a little bit more leeway. My wife is listening though, so I don't want to lock myself in.
And I say this all the time. Just they're one of the premier families in fantasy baseball and fantasy sports over there. So kudos to them for all they do and how often they are giving of themselves to the community. And I saw Danielle retired from fantasy baseball. So
she did. She's rooting on her Niners today. So
right, yeah, sure, that's a big day out there. Another rookie, Zach Geloff. I don't have much of a take here, genuinely, because I watched him sparingly. I'm on the East Coast. I don't watch a ton of A's games. Not that anyone really watches a ton of A's games, but opportunity is going to be there. We know that this is a team that is void of significant talent. Is that a reasonable way to say that? But Lucien, I'm going to start with you again here around Geloff, because you had the take on Jones, and I don't disagree with your point of view. So I'm wondering, is Geloff a similar story to you, where you've seen enough from a minor league perspective, and now in the majors has a power speed combo for a middle infielder that is reasonable? He's not going to change things drastically on your fantasy roster, but are you buying what Geloff did in the second half?
Yeah, I really want to, just because I want someone like the A's, just to have some bright spot. I think that he will be a bright spot. I think that he's going to have a solid career. I don't really buy him for this coming year. I'm a bit more concerned about him than I am about Jones. And I think, this is kind of similar thing to what Justin was saying with Nolan Jones, but his contact rate in the zone was really, really bad. 73.5% zone contact rate, and just really poor contact overall. So at least like Nolan Jones, as I was saying before, he kind of was able to punish pitches kind of around the edges of the zone a lot more. Zach Geloff, not so much. Only a 66.3% contact rate overall. That's really, really low. And kind of looking at, even as the season went on, kind of looking at his swing decisions, they kind of didn't feel like they improved necessarily, but they kind of got a little bit worse. His minor league track record is also just not quite as extensive as Jones. Jones was he's good. Geloff has a good minor league track record. Was a good prospect. Jones was more of a top 100 type prospect for a while. Was in the minors for a lot longer. Just showed a bit more. I think that Zach Geloff hits the ball really hard when he makes contact, but I'm just a little worried about him making enough contact to be consistent to do. And I think as the league adjusts him more and more this year, there's a reason why a lot of hitters have that sophomore slump. I don't necessarily know if I saw enough from him to think that he's going to avoid that, at least out of the gates this year. So I'm a little scared of him. For 2024, I think in the future he could be a really solid player.
An ADP in the mid 120s, 130s, I think I was seeing over on NFBC, projected by some sites to bat second, and that obviously begets more opportunity as long as he is staying in that spot in the lineup. Justin, any different take here on Zach Geloff?
I mean, not really. I think Lucien kind of nailed it. There is a lot of risk to the profile, and at the price, it is a little scary to me. The one thing I will say is kind of what you led off with, Dan, is that he's in Oakland. He's going to play. They don't really have much else, right? And the whole team's going to suck. So what does it matter if he sucks? So in some ways, I think he could just be an accumulator, which for deeper leagues is fine.
Right.
The problem is he's going a little bit too high for those deeper leagues. And I don't think that we saw 14 home runs in half a season from him last year, but I would be actually really surprised if he got to 20 home runs, even in a full season. I think he got pretty lucky in terms of the power. I don't think there's a ton of speed. I think he needs to accumulate. He needs 600 plate appearances, which I think he can get in Oakland, but at the price, it's just not that, enticing.
Interested to think about him for me in auction drafts because of the upside of the stolen bases at times. I don't know what price. I haven't seen any average auction prices yet out there. If anyone has them in chat or has access to somewhere with auctions thus far. speed's always enticing, right? Finding the, I know more stolen bases last year because of the rule changes, all that, but finding a power speed combo that gives you enough juice in the middle infield is a good thing to keep an eye on. Maybe he falls off, maybe again in an auction or your home league, you get a little bit of value if he falls a little further. Keeping an eye on time here, we have about 23 minutes left in our section. Don't forget, we're here for PitchCon donations. Appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of this myself. I will be donating at the end of our hour here. I
will as well.
Awesome. So raising money for ALS, raising money for any charity, but what Nick has done these past 5 days, basketball, be damned, obviously leaving to go coach rec basketball. But really appreciate the opportunity. Do want to try to get through a couple more batters, get through the pitchers. And then I do want at the end, players whose bad second halves you're ignoring. And that's a short list. We can just sort of fire off guys who you're back in on, even though the second half may have looked like a struggle. So continuing on here quickly, we have Tristan Casas. Now, I'm a Yankee fan. I live in Massachusetts, so I despise this man from the jump. Like, it's just, I won't draft him. Can't have it. I'm kidding. Obviously, I draft players that will help my fantasy teams. But he is one up here along with Bobby Dalbec, who just get so much more love in this area because of the pedigree of the system. I get it. So I am biased on this topic. With that said, Justin, are you a Casas believer? Or is this somebody you think is of value to fantasy baseball owners? Was the second half legitimate? Or do you see holes in his game that may rear their head here in 2024?
So I'm actually really interested to hear what Lucien has to say because I don't know what to make of Tristan Casas. In the first half, he really, really struggled, but the underlying numbers said like this is like he's just getting unlucky. Like he should be much better. He had near league average zone contact with all that power and patience at the plate. Like there was, and I even said like on podcasts, in articles, this is going to be a second half breakout. He's going to have a massive second half. Like go buy right now, buy low. And then he did. He came into the second half. He killed it, and I was like, yes. But then you look underneath the hood and you go, the skills completely reverted in the second half. He was fantastic on the surface, but like all the underlying skills were just truly atrocious. We're talking about a guy who had a 78% zone contact, way below league average. I don't know who Tristan Casas is. I don't know if he's the first half or the second half or a mix between the two. My guess is he is a mix between the two, and that these kind of uneven underlying stats, uneven surface stats will continue to happen. And that kind of volatility, I don't think is worth the price.
Lucien?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in kind of a bit of a similar spot. I think it is really strange how, like as Justin was saying, like he seemed like this obvious second half breakout. He did break out in the second half. Then looking at some of those numbers, things look a little weird. I was really interested looking at, in the second half, he pulled the ball. Like, so in the first half, he pulled the ball around 45% of the time. The second half was around 38. So kind of just like his approach kind of just started hitting to all fields a lot more, which is just like really interesting. I don't really know exactly what to make of it, honestly. I kind of, as someone who has, I believe in his minor league track record, he was someone who I was excited about before last year. I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt that I think that there's something interesting going on there. I also don't think that he's like necessarily in that tier of like amongst like the best first baseman in baseball, like he was the second half of last year. I just want to see a bit more of him to kind of get a better sense of exactly what he's going to be going forward. So I think he's a good hitter. I think he's definitely better than what he showed in the first half. I wouldn't be scared about reverting to anything like that. But yeah, some of the second half stuff like is a little weird. But he had a pretty good walk rate for the season. He hit the ball pretty hard. I think he's someone who's at the very least interesting. I think he's and I do think that there's upside considering the strong minor league track record and the prospect pedigree. Yeah,
I was going to point out, good call there. The walk rate is encouraging just from a get on base perspective. Obviously, OBP leagues, this is a guy who's not striking out nearly as much as a typical power hitter does. The walk rate's a little higher, so you get a little benefit there. I think, again, near 100 as ADP, this is somebody that I will find value at that position later, right? This is sort of a moment of not buying in at that ADP and not buying into what the second half was. Two more hitters, and then our pitchers will come momentarily. If there is anyone in particular over there in chat that you'd like to hear about, would appreciate you dropping it in chat at any point. So continuing on here, up next, Kyle Schwarber. I love watching him play baseball. I love watching him hit. Obviously, he has had a big impact on a couple of teams in his career. This is a guy who can hit the ball a mile, but that second half last year was dynamic, was fun to watch, was streaky as all get out at times. Justin, is this just who Kyle Schwarber is? So I guess that's the question here. Kyle Schwarber, to me, is the ultimate roto 5x5 play, taking batting average out. But in the fact that I'm not playing him in a head-to-head league because of that well, if I have on my plan, I need to caveat myself, meaning I'm not chasing his second half in ADP this year. But in a 5x5 roto league, I just think this is who he is. He has these 3-month stretches, these 2.5-month stretches that are absolutely epic. And at the end of the year, you say that I got my guy. I got the home runs. I got the RBIs. I got the runs. This is fantastic. Is that what you're seeing from Schwarber in the second half? Just as simple, this is who he is and this is what we live with?
Yeah, in your standard 5x5 leagues, I often think about putting batting average because guys like Kyle Schwarber exist, right? Like, he's going to contribute in 3 categories, the power ones, the runs, the RBIs, the home runs. Sometimes he might steal a couple bases for you. You're not really worried about that. And his batting average is going to be all over the place. Right. It's never going to be good, but it's going to be all over the place. But there's so much variance in batting average that, I think you can get away with it. Now, like you said, in head-to-head formats, in points league formats, like unless you're getting, good amount of plus for walks or something like that, I don't love the volatility, right? Because he can win you a week or he can lose you a week. And the worst thing that can happen is you lose in the playoffs because he hit 0-43 for that week. So, I like Kyle Schwarber because he is a set it or forget it guy. You do look at that stat line in the end of the season and you go, yeah, I got 45 home runs and I'm pretty happy with that. And I think there are people who are going to just stay away from the volatility. I'm okay with that as long as other aspects of my team are safe.
Lucien, increasing strikeouts for Schwarber throughout his career. We've seen that number tick up. Obviously, more at-bats will yield more strikeouts, right? So batting at the top of the lineup. What about you on Schwarber?
Yeah, I kind of think Schwarber, for me, the second half, I wouldn't draft him based on his second half. I think he's type of hitter just throughout his career, has been a little streaky. I think the second half, was more or less a hot streak. He's going to get you the home runs regardless. He's going to get you the RBI. He's going to get you the runs. I think that he's a good hitter, but I think this is kind of an example we talked about at the beginning where the second half is just a small sample. I think this year his season happened to be he was kind of not that great in the first half, really good in the second half. It kind of averaged out to be something in the middle. I think just looking at his career, if you look at his season stats the past couple of years, pretty consistent. He was pretty consistent year to year. There wasn't a huge fluctuation. So I think a lot of it is just that this year the way it worked was his second half just looks a lot stronger. But if you kind of add it up into one larger sample, I think that's kind of more what we're looking at here. I don't think he did anything meaningful to change in the second half that made him a much better hitter. I think he just happened to go on a hot streak. I know that sounds kind of it's a bit reductive, but I think that's just kind of what it was with the case of Schwarber. We kind of know who he is at this point.
All right, I do want to get to pitchers here. We have 15 minutes left. Any hot takes or strong feelings on Jake Berger from either of you that you want to make sure we talk about here?
He's a big boy who hits for power. I don't think that's changing.
Okay, very good. He lives up to his name. So let's get to pitchers because I do think, obviously, to me, year over year, pitching is getting harder and harder. And that might just be I'm getting old and crankier when it comes to fantasy baseball. But it does feel like we were seeing so many more teams play around with innings pitched and how we're handling these pitchers, which makes it infinitely harder. And the hope would be to find pitchers who are excelling in the second half or building up their arm strength and are going to have more innings, more pitches next year, and we can project them out. I know a big one here at Pitchers List, Cole Reagans, is somebody that lots of people have talked about. There are lots of opinions out in the world about Reagans. Lucien, I'll come to you first. One is Reagans somebody that you are targeting at this point? Is this somebody that you believe the second half? And two, how are you thinking through pitching and using second half stats to come into this year?
Yeah, so I guess instead of pitching, just pitching is hard right now just because there's a lot of volatility. And just with injuries these days, it's just hard to predict who's going to be the next guy who's going to get hurt, or who's going to go. And that's sadly part of what the game is right now is pitchers are getting hurt a lot. They're pitching fewer innings. So it's kind of tough to count on like any pitcher like really confidently just because you don't really know what's going to happen. And there's so much fluctuation. Like, I mean, like, yeah, someone like Cole Reagans, I mean, I think that I'm in on Cole Reagans, I would say. I think that what he did when he went to the Royals in the second half last year, like it all looks pretty real to me. Like every stat you look at looks really strong. His ERA was great. His FIP was great. His expected stats were really good. He has like 5 pitches that are all really strong. He has incredible swing and miss rates on all of his pitches. But my biggest concern is just like, yeah, the track record before this year is just so limited. This kind of came out of nowhere. I believe that that's possible with pitchers. I know he, and I unfortunately missed the talk yesterday with Nick and Cole, so would have loved to hear a bit more what they have to say about all that. But I think that everything he showed last year looked real to me. I think that he's someone worth rostering, but personally, I would, if it's like between Cole Reagans and someone who maybe was a little bit worse last year, but then has a bit more of a track record of success, I'd go with the guy with the track record, just because this did kind of come out of the blue. And I think that, you know, it can happen with pitchers. They make little tweaks. I think he made some tweaks, but so yeah, kind of, I'd say I'm definitely in on Cole Reagans, but with the caveat that I definitely would like to see him do it again for at least another half a year before I'm like all in.
And that's a great just fantasy baseball point. This is where I'm an old, but that's how I've always played. Is I need to see like a year and a half of data, not a half year of data before I'm investing. But candidly, that's when you miss out on players, right? That's when you miss out on them before their breakout and you get the higher value off their ADP. Reagans again is I think a guy between 100 and 120. I've seen mostly in a lot of drafts. You made the point, Lucien, about a tweak, adding a pitch, changing a grip on a pitch. You know, the way they tunnel, maybe they saw something during a film breakdown that made them change something. Justin, with the volatility and with trying to find upside for your pitching staff, is Reagan someone you're believing in that 100 to 120 window based off of the second half of 2023?
I haven't taken the gamble yet. And I mean, I've done 5 or 6 drafts already, but I don't mind the price at all. I mean, we're seeing like Tariq Skubal go inside the top 50 picks. And like, is there really that much more potential volatility or downside to a Skubal? And I like Skubal. This isn't a negative Skubal, but it is more of a pro Reagans. I'm actually really, really surprised that Reagans isn't higher. He was the talk of fantasy baseball for like a month straight. And then he had like 1 or 2 bad starts right at the end. And people kind of, I mean, they're still excited, but they pump the brakes a little bit. I have no problem with him going where he's at. I think he's a nice little gamble. There is injury risk there, obviously. He has had injury risk in the past. Dude throws 100. He's got 5 pitches. Like, I mean, there's a lot. It's a really, really good park to pitch in, a division that isn't that tough to go against. Like, there's a lot going for Cole Reagans that I like.
Yeah, context matters. And I think park factors are starting to level out, I think, meaning there are a variety of park factors, but you're not seeing as wide an array outside of Colorado of pitchers parks versus hitters parks, at least what I've seen over the past few years of data. I have not dug into Reagans enough, but we'll get back there. I think the data here is so fascinating to track different pitches and how pitches are developed and are cited from these different stats. You see, you know, what Nick does at Pitchers List, what Pitching Ninja does over on Twitter and with his videos and interviewing these guys. You know, Reagans might call something a sweeper that someone else calls a slider, and understanding the differences there are always fascinating to me as well. Grayson Rodriguez, another youngster who we want to talk about here briefly, Justin. A second half that, I mean, the Orioles overall were having a second half to believe in. I struggle with a pitcher whose K- walk ratio isn't above 20%. That's sort of just a number I like to see as a definition. That can vary, right? That depends. You talk about someone like Zach Greinke, his K- walk is 0 half the time. But what do you make of Grayson Rodriguez? Are you buying the pedigree? Are you buying the upside here heading into 2024?
I am. I think throughout the entire first half is just kind of rookie learning curve and getting unlucky too. But I mean, dude is just dominant. Like, and it is a great park to pitch in. I think that there is huge breakout potential. I haven't made the plunge yet in a draft. I really hope I'm going to, because the problem is everybody seems to really love Grayson Rodriguez, and for good reason. Like, good team, good park, great stuff. Really showed growth in his ability to mix pitches, make better decisions, and then didn't get unlucky in the way he did a lot in the first half. So I think Grayson Rodriguez might be talked about as a top 10, top 15 pitcher going into next season. And yeah, I want to take a gamble on that.
What about you, Lucien? I think Justin makes a great point there of the upside is there to see it. There are factors on the team that matter. Are you buying Grayson Rodriguez as a top 75 player ADP wise for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Justin overall. I think that there's a lot of upside with Grayson Rodriguez. I mean, I think I do like the prospect pedigree, the minor league track record. It is strong. That makes me feel more confident that like the stuff we saw in the second half is real. Also, again, that first half, I mean, I think a lot of that was just kind of obviously luck and rookie stuff. His xFIP in the first half was 392. Looking at it now, which like an xFIP isn't everything, but that's not bad. I think there's a lot of like noise surrounding that rough first stint. In the second half, when he came back up, it was 370, so not like even that much better. It's still a good number for like a rookie pitcher though. Looks like he added some velocity as the season went on as well. Pretty much every pitch he had like got around like a tick faster. I think that's something that's important. And just looking at the way he was pitching more, it looked like he really was kind of attacking his zone a bit more. He got more swinging strikes when he came back up. He's a young guy. I think he's going to keep on improving. I think the upside with him is really, really is huge. So
we have good. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Lucien.
Oh no, yeah.
Okay. Good. Nick Pavetta's up next, and this is a guy. Polarizing is probably the wrong word. I don't think he's polarizing, but I think there's been a lot of takes on Nick Pivetta and what the downside is going to Boston after being in Philadelphia. The second half of the season, again, arbitrary point in time. Agree with what Lucien said at the top of this conversation. Saw him return a little bit more to the form I think his supporters wanted to see, in that the walk rate really dipped. The K per 9, the K minus walk was at 28 to 30% for most of the second half. But this is a guy, Justin, that I think a lot of experts, and rightly so, I'm not using it as a have questioned how much upside there really is in how he approaches pitching, what he does on a April to September basis. Is Pivetta somebody you're willing to maybe not anchor rotation in, but look at an SP2, SP3 as somebody you're willing to invest in and find some K upside with this Red Sox rotation?
Nick Pivetta is a slug-a-bed. He is a sneak speak. He is spoony. I mean, this is an older reference, but I think it's such a good one that's been passed down, to kind of the newer generation that they'll understand. Like, this is Charlie Brown kicking a football. Every year, Nick Pivetta shows just enough at one point in the season to just make you think you can kick that football, and you fall on your butt. Will I kick the football again? Absolutely. But you shouldn't, and I'm not going to do it at the draft price. I'll when someone drops him early on in the season, I'm sure I'll pick him up, and I will stream him, and then I will get blown up myself and fall on my butt. But I am making a vow to myself to not draft Nick Pivetta and just let someone else make that mistake, drop him, and let me pick him up later on.
I love that. Actually, I probably have thought of it before, but the idea of those players you want to target in that regard is a great one. I think from a strategy perspective that goes beyond drafting. And so many people draft and then forget about their fantasy baseball teams. Yeah. But I think that's a good one. Lucien, what about yourself? I may have overstated SP2 there, SP3, SP4, a guy going, I think 71st or 72nd for starting pitchers on the year. That's not unreasonable for what we saw in the second half. Do you buy Nick Pivetta?
Yeah, I think probably it's a little high for me. I like Nick Pivetta. I've liked Nick Pivetta for a long time. I was really like when the Red Sox traded for Nick Pivetta, I thought like that was just like a total steal for him. I thought he was going to improve a lot with them, and he kind of stagnated for the most part. His second half numbers from last year are kind of incredible, though. I was even looking further, just splitting up because he started and pitched out of the bullpen a bit. So just like as a starter in the second half last year, he had like a 34% strikeout rate and about like a 5.5% walk rate, which is just like kind of incredible. His ground ball rate was into like the low 40%. He added a sweeper. So just like there's a lot of stuff to really like about it. But yeah, I just feel like I'm like a kind of with Justin a little bit, just like I feel like I kind of was waiting for the Nick Pivetta breakout for so long, and it kind of came in that second half. I kind of want to see him just sustain it a bit more before I'm totally all in. But yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, in the SP4, SP3 range, he's not bad. I think he's a good pitcher. I think he's going to get you strikeouts for sure. But But I kind of would like to see him just like have another half where he's like looks really dominant again, pitching as a starter full time before I'm like all in on him.
142 innings last year, 38 games, 16 starts. I do want to get to a couple of things from chat as we're winding up our hour here. Paul Sporer checking in, saying Grayson's issue was a couple of bad starts in May, just home runs galore. We did have 2 questions coming in. One, let's hit on Royce Lewis. So Royce Lewis, Minnesota Twins. Justin, any take on whether Lewis is a legitimate star in the making here in 2024 and somebody you're investing in from a fantasy baseball perspective?
I think it's all about health with Royce Lewis. I mean, if he can stay on the field, I think he is a star. I think all the skills are there. I think we've known it for a really long time throughout his prospect days. He just has not ever been able to stay on the field for a long period of time. And that makes him very risky where he's going. I have taken the gamble a couple times early, so I don't have to take it in my big money drafts later. But I think the shallower league you have, 10-team leagues, even some 12-team leagues, makes a lot of sense because there's replacement value. Start getting deeper leagues, 15-team leagues, only leagues, things like that. I wouldn't take that risk because the replacement value is just not there.
Seeing a top 50 ADP over on NFBC right now for Royce Lewis. Lucien, any take there on the Twins youngster?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel similarly with the injury. I'm a little scared about the injury risk just because there's been so much stuff throughout his career. But I mean, like, yeah, I mean, the projections are great for him. He was great when he got called up last year. He's been really good in the minors the past few years. He was a top overall pick in the draft a bunch of years ago. Like, I think that, yeah, if he can stay on the field, I think he's really strong. I think he could really break out. But I am definitely a little nervous just considering just the injury history that he'll continue to stay healthy. I hope he does. I'd love to see a full season of Royce Lewis. I think he's spectacular when he plays.
Well, we are at the top of the hour. Want to hit quickly here. Justin, anybody who had a poor second half or a poor 2023 that stands out as somebody that you're targeting, maybe who's fallen in ADP?
I think that, I mean, I don't know that they've fallen enough. Tatis had a poor second half. I'm not worried about it. Framber Valdez had a poor second half. I'm not worried about it. Maybe his ADP is a little bit lower than it should be. Brian Bayo didn't have a great second half. I think he is going to be really, really good. I love the ADP right now. Guy I'm worried about that ADP hasn't fallen enough is Mitch Keller. People are still treating Mitch Keller like he's some sort of ace. And while he had a fantastic beginning, I think we saw the volatility, and I'm not going to draft Mitch Keller this year, I don't think.
Scott Baio also had a bad year in 2023. Lucien, what do you think? Anybody on your list?
Yeah, I mean, the big one for me was Tatis too. I think his second half, if you look at his second half numbers, they look really bad. He hit 225, 297, 368. That's pretty poor. But I think he just got really unlucky. You look at his expected stats. His expected slugging percentage was a lot higher. His track record is so strong. He was still adjusting, coming back, playing a full season after being out for a while. I think he's fine. And I guess Framber was another person I was really interested in. I think that overall, I'm not too concerned about Framber. I think track record's strong. But I don't know, late in the season, in the postseason too, he looked pretty rough. He was walking a lot more batters than he had before, which kind of concerns me a little bit. But I think that honestly, a lot of it was just fatigue. I think it comes back this next year. I think he's going to be really strong once again.
Awesome conversation, gentlemen. Appreciate the insight. Appreciate the work here to get ready for today's panel.